At my daughter's lavish housewarming party, my husband suddenly grabbed my wrist and whispered, "We have to leave, right now." He didn't say another word until we were both sitting inside the car. Then he turned to me and quietly asked, "You saw it, didn't you?" What he revealed next made me realize that my daughter and my son-in-law were no longer my family. This one begins with trust, but ends somewhere you won't expect. Before we go any further, drop a quick comment below. What are you doing while listening, working, driving, or just taking a quiet moment? I genuinely appreciate you being here with me. A quick note, some details are shaped for storytelling and reflection. The lesson at the heart, that's what I hope reaches you. My husband's grip on my wrist was tight enough to bruise his voice barely audible over the champagne glasses clinking around us. We need to leave right now. My name is Joyce Townsend. I'm 68 years old, and I had spent the last 35 years building Townsend Rehabilitation Services from a single rented treatment room into a 12-center operation worth $28 million. I had negotiated with hospital administrators, insurance executives, and state regulators. I knew when someone was lying to me. My husband, Ernest, 71, and retired from a career spent designing power grid systems, had never gripped me like this, not once in 43 years of marriage. Why? I kept my voice low, my smile frozen in place for the 50 wealthy strangers circulating through my daughter's new mansion. What's going on? Not here. His hand trembled against my skin. Trust me, we leave now. We had arrived at the housewarming party 30 minutes earlier, me carrying an Italian ceramic fruit bowl I'd chosen carefully, Ernest holding a bottle of wine from the year our daughter was born. The Eastover mansion rose behind wrought iron gates like something from a magazine, 4 stories of pale stone circular driveway topiary shaped into perfect spheres. $1.9 million, the listing had said. I'd provided $850,000 for the down payment. A gift, I'd called it. An investment in my daughter's future. My daughter Ariadne, 36 and impeccably dressed in designer tailoring I had unknowingly funded, stood near the marble fireplace. She hadn't looked at me directly since we'd arrived. Every time I approached, she found an urgent reason to drift toward another cluster of guests. Her laugh sounded like breaking glass. Milton Finch, 39 and carrying himself with the false confidence of a man drowning in debt, moved through the crowd like he owned every gilded surface. He was my son-in-law, married to Ariadne for 3 years. He worked in commercial real estate development, or so he claimed. I'd never seen evidence of a successful project. "Ariadne, darling," a woman in diamonds called out, "where's the powder room?" Before my daughter could answer, Milton's mother intercepted. "Second floor, dear, third door on the left. The guest bath is being renovated." She smiled with proprietary warmth, guiding the woman toward the grand staircase, as if she'd lived here for decades. I watched Milton's father, silver-haired, expensive suit, direct the catering staff to refresh the bar. Not suggestions, instructions. The staff obeyed immediately. My daughter stood frozen near the fireplace, champagne glass clutched in both hands, smiling at nothing. "I'm going to find the restroom," Ernest murmured, releasing my wrist. He disappeared up the staircase before I could respond. I had spent 35 years learning to read a room, the tension between what people said and what their bodies betrayed. The micro-expressions that revealed fear, deception, desperation. Every instinct I had ever built told me something here was profoundly, irreversibly wrong. Milton's parents weren't guests. They moved through the space like owners. Ariadne wasn't a proud homeowner showing off her first mansion. She looked like an anxious hostess in someone else's house, terrified of breaking something valuable. Ernest returned 12 minutes later. His face had gone pale, almost gray. His engineering mind, the one that could spot structural flaws in a blueprint at 50 paces, looked like it had just calculated an impossible equation. "We need to leave right now," he said, and his hand closed around my wrist. We made our excuses. Headache, early morning meeting. Ariadne barely acknowledged our departure, her relief visible for just a fraction of a second before the frozen smile returned. Ernest didn't speak until we were locked inside our sedan in the dark parking lot engine, off surrounded by luxury vehicles that cost more than most people's houses. "What did you see?" I asked. He stared through this windshield at the lit mansion. "I didn't go to the restroom." "I know." "I went looking for her office, or a study, somewhere private." His hands gripped the steering wheel even though we weren't moving. "I found it. Third-floor corner room, beautiful oak desk, built-in bookshelves, view of the garden." "Ernest." "There was a framed document on the wall behind the desk, property deed, Professional framing museum quality glass. His voice had gone flat, the way it did when he was processing information too terrible to feel yet. The mansion is registered to an LLC, Finch Family Holdings, formed 3 weeks ago. The air in the car felt suddenly thin. That's Milton's family name, I said. Yes. Ariadne's name is on it too, obviously. She's the primary buyer. The mortgage is in her name appears nowhere on that deed. Ernest turned to face me. I read it twice, 3 times. Limited Liability Company, registered agent Milton Prescott Finch, secondary officers his parents, 0 mention of Ariadne Townsend or Ariadne Finch, not as owner, not as stakeholder, not even as resident. My hands had gone numb. You didn't actually see the final paperwork, did you? He asked quietly. When you wired the down payment. The attorney said everything was handled. Ariadne was the buyer. I was just providing family financial assistance. Standard gift letter, no strings attached. The words sounded insane, now spoken aloud in the dark. I trusted. I know. She's my daughter. I know. Ernest's hands trembled on the steering wheel, his engineer's mind already cataloging implications I wasn't ready to face. I stared through the windshield at the lit mansion, my money, my daughter's dream home, registered to a company I'd never heard of. The attorney had called it a smooth closing. How smooth does a theft need to be before nobody notices? Ernest's voice barely above a whisper. Your money bought nothing for our daughter. It bought everything for him. The blue glow of the computer monitor was the only light in my home office at 11:43 that night, my fingers already pulling up the county property records portal before Ernest had finished locking the front door behind us. I would find out exactly how smooth the theft had been. Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds. I typed the Eastover address. The search results loaded in seconds. Property owner, Finch Holdings, LLC. Registered agent, Milton Prescott Finch. Date of formation, September 8th, 2023. I clicked through to the operating agreement. Milton listed as sole managing member. His parents as secondary officers. Ariadne's name appeared nowhere. Ernest leaned over my shoulder. The filing date. Look at the filing date. September 8th. I opened my banking records in a second window. My wire transfer, $850,000, had been sent on September 10th. 2 days, I said. They created the LLC 2 days before I wired the money. They planned this before you ever signed anything. Not a mistake. Not opportunistic theft. Calculated, premeditated fraud executed while my daughter called me for advice about paint colors. I printed every page. 23 pages documenting exactly how my own child had stolen from me. How many times had I told myself that a good mother always sees the best in her child? How many red flags had I explained away as independence, as generational distance, Milton's gambling debts, Ariadne's mysterious bonuses that never appeared on pay stubs? I had built a career on reading people. I had ignored every instinct when it came to my daughter. We confront her first thing tomorrow, Ernest said. I arrived at headquarters at 8 the next morning. Ariadne's glass-walled office occupied the southeast corner. I walked in without knocking and placed the printed documents on her desk. She looked up. Mother, I wasn't expecting you. Read it, I said. Her fingers trembled as she turned the pages. Milton appeared in this doorway before she finished as if he'd been waiting. Joyce, good morning. I should have explained the structure earlier to avoid confusion. Confusion, I repeated. This is a temporary LLC arrangement, he said, positioning himself beside her desk. In 120 days, the property transfers entirely to Ariadne's name. Standard tax optimization to avoid gift tax penalties when a parent provides substantial down payment funds. I had negotiated federal healthcare contracts for 3 decades. I knew legal nonsense when I heard it. Your name isn't on any of these documents, sweetheart, I said to Ariadne. It will be. Tears formed with impressive speed. Mother, you never trust me. Every decision I make, you investigate me like a criminal. I run this company's finances. I manage $28 million in assets. But you treat me like I'm still 16? The performance was flawless, voice breaking in exactly the right places, the appeal to guilt. I just want to understand, sweetheart. There's nothing to understand except that you don't trust your own daughter. She turned toward the window, shoulders shaking. I stood to leave and caught the reflection in her computer monitor. Not her face, the screen itself. A file folder labeled employee_retirement_reserve_Q3 being dragged into the recycle bin. Her hand on the mouse clicking. A dialog box. Permanently delete this cannot be undone. Her finger pressing yes. The folder vanishing. All of it visible in perfect clarity while she performed grief for my benefit. I kept my face neutral. I'm sorry for upsetting you. We'll talk later. I walked out with measured pace, down the elevator, across the parking lot, into my car. Then I sat gripping the steering wheel, processing what I'd witnessed. The house was $850,000, a theft I could survive financially. The Employee Retirement Reserve Fund held the retirement contributions of 200 employees who had spent decades building my company: physical therapists, administrative staff, facility managers, people who trusted me to protect their futures. If I confronted Ariadne now, truly confronted her with accusations, she would destroy every piece of evidence within hours. She controlled all digital financial systems. She had CFO access to every account. I needed time, professional help. I needed her to believe I was old and confused and easily manipulated. I called her cell phone. She answered on the third ring, voice still shaky. "Sweetheart," I said, making my voice soft and tremulous. "I'm so sorry. I overreacted. I'm getting old, and these modern financial structures confuse me. I trust you." Her relief was audible. "It's okay, Mother. These LLC arrangements are complex. Just let me handle the paperwork from now on." "Of course, dear. I love you." "I love you, too." I ended the call and immediately dialed a number I hadn't used in a decade. Desmond Morales answered on the second ring, his voice still carrying the same methodical calm I remembered from when he'd helped me navigate a Medicare billing investigation years earlier. 47 years old now, forensic auditor, the kind of man who found money that didn't want to be found. "Joyce Townsend," he said. "It's been a long time." "I need you to find where the money went," I said, voice steady and cold. "All of it." I had pretended to believe the lie about the house because I needed Ariadne to feel safe to stop covering her tracks. But that deleted folder meant 200 people who had worked beside me for decades might be in danger. The house was just the beginning. The crystal vase cost $300 and felt appropriately heavy in my hands as I walked up the stone steps of the mansion I'd paid for but would never own. Desmond Morales was already working in the background, tracing digital breadcrumbs through shell accounts and wire transfers. My job was simpler and infinitely harder: pretend to be the confused, apologetic mother who believed her daughter's lies. Ariadne opened the door before I knocked. She'd been watching through the window. "Mother." Her smile was cautious, testing whether my surrender yesterday had been genuine. "I brought this as an apology." I held out the vase, tissue paper rustling. "I overreacted about the paperwork. You're right, I need to trust you more." "You." Her shoulders dropped with visible relief. "You didn't need to bring anything." "I wanted to." I stepped into the marble foyer, letting my gaze drift appreciatively across the space, as if seeing it for the first time without suspicion. "It really is a beautiful home, sweetheart." Milton emerged from the living room, phone pressed to his ear. He ended the call without pleasantries and gestured toward the west wall with the casual authority of someone who'd never doubted his right to command. "Call the contractor," he said to Ariadne, pointing at the bare expanse beside the fireplace. "I want built-in shelving here by Friday, floor-to-ceiling custom walnut. Tell them price isn't an issue." Ariadne didn't hesitate, didn't question, didn't suggest they discuss it later. She pulled out her phone immediately with practiced efficiency. "I'll handle it right now." I watched the exchange with the careful neutrality I'd perfected over 35 years of reading staff dynamics. This wasn't fear. This wasn't a victim responding to an abuser's demands. This was choreography they'd rehearsed until the movements became automatic. Milton handed her a document from the hall table. "Sign the change order for the pool contractor, bottom of page 2. She took the pen he offered and signed without reading. The motion was fluid, confident, her wrist angling exactly the way mine did when I signed electronic documents with a stylus. Not similar. Identical. She'd been practicing my signature, studying the rhythm and pressure points until she could replicate it perfectly. My daughter wasn't being controlled. She was a willing, rehearsed accomplice. I had watched her take her first steps in this kind of house. Not this house, but one I'd cleaned professionally while putting myself through nursing school. I'd promised myself she would own one someday, not scrub its floors. I never imagined she would steal one. "The contractor can meet at 4, Ariadne said, ending her call. "They'll bring samples." "Good." Milton checked his watch. "I'll be in the West Wing. Show them the wall specs when they arrive." He disappeared down the hallway. Ariadne turned to me with an expression carefully calibrated for maternal consumption, apologetic, vulnerable young. "I'm glad you understand about the paperwork," she said. "The tax structures are complicated. I didn't mean to make you feel excluded." "I know, sweetheart." I touched her arm gently. "May I use your restroom?" "Of course. 2nd floor, 3rd door on the left." I climbed the curved staircase, my fingers trailing the iron railing, and walked past the third door without stopping. Milton's private study occupied the corner Ernest had described its location perfectly. The door stood open, afternoon light slanting through tall windows onto an oak desk that cost more than most people earned in 6 months. The ornate metal trash can beside the desk hadn't been emptied. I could see crumpled papers mounded above the rim. I listened. Voices drifted from the west wing. I had maybe 5 minutes before anyone noticed my absence. I knelt beside the trash can and began smoothing papers against my thigh. First document, debt collection letter. Final notice, $487,000 outstanding balance. Immediate remittance required. Addressed to Milton Prescott Finch. Second document, another collection notice. $561,000 past due. Account forwarded to legal action. Different creditor, same recipient. Third document, investment account statement. Account frozen pending resolution of margin call. Outstanding balance $352,000. I did the math automatically. $1.4 million in documented debt, and those were just the papers he'd been careless enough to throw away where household staff might see them. Fourth document, single page on heavy cardstock printed email format. The letterhead made my hands go still. Brent Long, MD, private practice, geriatric psychiatric consultation. The email body was brief, professional, terrifying. Dr. Long, thank you for our preliminary conversation. I am requesting formal consultation regarding cognitive evaluation procedures for an elderly patient. Confidential assessment needed to establish baseline, diminished capacity for legal purposes. Please advise your availability for initial screening. Regards, M. Finch. The date stamp at the bottom, March 15th, 2023. March, 6 months ago, before the mansion purchase, before the shell company formation, before any claim that I was showing signs of decline or confusion or memory loss, I heard footsteps on the stairs. I folded the email into quarters and slipped it into my jacket pocket, then arranged the other papers back in the trash can with careful randomness. I was standing at the bookshelf examining Milton's leadership biography collection when Ariadne appeared in the doorway. Mother, the restroom is down the hall. I know, sweetheart, I got distracted by the view from up here. I gestured toward the window overlooking the garden. It's lovely. She watched me for 3 seconds longer than necessary, then smiled. The contractors just arrived. I should go. Of course. I left 20 minutes later with appropriate hugs and promises to have dinner soon. I drove 3 blocks before pulling over, hands shaking too badly to trust myself on the road. They had contacted a physician about declaring me incompetent 6 months ago. In March, when my company was thriving, when I showed 0 signs of decline, when they had no reason to claim concern, except that I was standing between them and something they wanted badly enough to institutionalize me for. The house theft was never the end goal. It was the funding mechanism. They had always planned to lock me away and take everything. The system accepted my old master administrator credentials at 2:07 in the morning. The same username I'd created when I first digitized the company's financial records in 2001. A backdoor Ariadne never knew existed. Everything turned out to be exactly as devastating as I'd feared. Ernest sat on the sofa behind me, awake but silent, while I navigated past the sanitized quarterly reports Ariadne presented to the board and went straight to the raw general ledger. The database still organized entries the way I'd designed it 22 years ago. I searched for irregular vendor payments. The filter returned 43 results. I sorted by amount. Renew Advisory Group appeared on line 6. Monthly payment $42,000. Category Clinical Development Consulting. Service address, Post Office Box 4721, Henderson, Nevada. No phone number, no employees listed, no website, no physical location beyond a mail drop. $42,000 every month for 18 months. $756,000 total paid to a company that existed only as a database entry and a Nevada P.O. box. I initiated a full transaction log download. The screen flashed violent red. Security breach, admin override detected. Alerting CFO immediately. System access suspended pending review. The download continued, running progress bar, crawling toward completion, but the warning banner stayed locked across the top. The alert, Ernest said quietly. She's going to know. Good. I watched the progress bar reach 100% files, downloading to the encrypted flash drive in my pocket. Let her panic. I need her to think it was an accident. The download completed. I removed the drive and closed the browser. The red warning disappeared. My hands were steady. At 6:30 that morning, aggressive knocking shattered the quiet. I'd been awake for 4.5 hours, but I was ready. I answered the door in my nightgown hair, deliberately unbrushed, rubbing my eyes like someone startled from sleep. Ariadne stood on the porch in yesterday's clothes, face flushed, breathing fast. Professional panic. "Mother?" She pushed past me into the entryway. There was a level 5 security breach at 2 a.m. Someone accessed the central financial ledger with deprecated admin credentials. The system flagged it as a potential ransomware attack. I blinked at her manufactured confusion settling across my features. "Oh goodness, is everything all right? Was it you?" She studied my face with the intensity of someone searching for lies. "Did you try to access the company's server last night?" I let my expression shift to embarrassed recognition. Oh dear. That machine wouldn't let me see my retirement distribution numbers. I was worried about the tax withholding for next year. I kept clicking buttons until everything shut off. Did I break something important? Her shoulders dropped. The tension drained from her posture so visibly I could track it leaving. She'd been terrified I was investigating her. Now she just thought I was incompetent. "Mother, you can't access those systems anymore. They're encrypted now. You could have compromised the entire financial database." Her voice carried patient exasperation. "Promise me you won't try to log in again. If you have questions about your retirement account, just ask me." "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I didn't mean to cause problems." I touched her arm with trembling fingers. "I promise, no more computers." She exhaled some final thread of suspicion, releasing. "It's okay. Just leave all system access to me from now on." She left after extracting 2 more promises and a hug. I watched her drive away, then returned to the bedroom where Ernest was pretending to sleep. For 3 days, I played the confused old woman while waiting for Desmond's report. I put my keys in the refrigerator. I called Ariadne by her childhood friend's name. I signed the wrong date on a check. Each performance was perfect. Each performance killed something inside me. On the 4th night, Desmond called from a number I didn't recognize and gave me an address with no name on the door. The office occupied a 3rd-floor corner in a building that still had asbestos tiles and fluorescent lights that hummed. Desmond sat behind a scarred wooden desk document spread in careful rows under a dim yellow lamp. He'd aged since I'd last seen him. 47 now, with silver threading through his dark hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. He still had the methodical calm of someone who trusted numbers more than people. "Phase 1 findings," he said, tapping the first stack. "Renew Advisory Group, registered in Nevada to an individual named Marcus Fincher, an alias. The Articles of Incorporation list a Los Angeles attorney as registered agent, but I traced the bank account. It feeds directly into an offshore account controlled by Milton Finch. $756,000 funneled over 18 months. I nodded. I'd expected that. "The retirement fund," I said. "Tell me about the retirement fund." Desmond's expression shifted. Not quite sympathy, more like the look a surgeon gives before delivering terminal news. He spread a second set of documents across the desk. The employee retirement trust balance should be $9.2 million based on contributions matches and investment returns over the past 3 years. The actual current balance is $5.6 million. $3.6 million, I said. Gone. 47 separate transactions over 14 months, each one structured to stay below the automated fraud alert threshold. Whoever did this understood the monitoring systems intimately. Ariadne designed those systems. I know. He pulled out a timeline dates marked in red. This is what you need to see. The first unauthorized withdrawal from the retirement fund occurred 23 months ago, October 2021. I did the math. 23 months after she became CFO. Yes. Desmond's finger moved down the timeline. Milton's investment account collapse happened 8 months later, June 2022. The offshore gambling debts started accumulating in August 2022. The syndicate collection letters are from this year. I stared at the timeline, understanding, crystallizing like ice in my chest. She started stealing before any of his crises, I said. 23 months before. Desmond's voice was clinical, factual, devastating. She wasn't manipulated by him. She started it first. I sat in that quiet office staring at the timeline Desmond had built. 23 months after I handed her the CFO title, Ariadne had made the first withdrawal. No Milton, no debt crisis, no outside pressure, just my daughter, 23 months into the position I'd given her, deciding my employees' retirement savings were hers to take. The question that haunted me wasn't how it was why she'd ever needed him at all. When Margaret Hastings walked into the dim office carrying a leather briefcase instead of her usual tablet, I knew Desmond had found something that required a lawyer's interpretation and a lawyer's warning. The question of why Ariadne had ever needed Milton at all didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what they'd built together and what they planned to do with it. Margaret Hastings was a sharp-eyed attorney in her mid-50s who specialized in elder fraud cases. She set her briefcase on the scarred wooden table with the careful precision of someone carrying evidence that could destroy lives. The leather smelled like old courtrooms and expensive hourly rates. "Show her," Margaret said to Desmond. He spread 47 printed transaction logs across the desk in chronological rows. Each page documented a withdrawal from the Employee Retirement Trust. $5,000 here, $8,000 there, $12,000. The amounts varied deliberately, staying below the $15,000 threshold that triggered automatic Department of Labor review. But it wasn't the amounts that made my hands go cold. It was the signature at the bottom of each authorization form. Mine, perfectly reproduced. The same slight rightward slant. The same loop in the Y of my last name. The same pressure points where my stylus hesitated fractionally before completing the T in Townsend. "Every withdrawal was authorized with your electronic signature," Desmond said quietly. "Cloned from your July equipment contract, the one approving new therapeutic tables for the Charlotte facility. The forgery is perfect, pixel perfect." I picked up one of the pages. The paper felt like it weighed 10 pounds. "I never approved these," I said. "I never even saw these transactions." "I know." Desmond's voice carried the clinical detachment of someone delivering a diagnosis. "But if the Department of Labor launches an investigation today, if anyone looks at these records right now, you go to federal prison for 18 to 25 years. Embezzlement from an employee benefit plan is a federal crime. Every signature is yours. Every authorization traces back to your login credentials. Ariadne and Milton walk away clean." Margaret leaned forward, elbows on the table. "They built the perfect frame. You're not just the suspect. You're the only suspect. They had built a cage around me so perfect that the bars were made of my own signature. Every attempt to prove my innocence would use evidence that condemned me. Every door I tried to open would lock from the inside." I set the paper down carefully. My hands wanted to shake. I didn't let them. "What else?" I asked. Margaret opened her briefcase. The latches made sharp metallic clicks in the quiet office. She pulled out a thick folder and slid it across the table. Desmond recovered these from Ariadne's deleted server folders, email chain between her and Milton. Mostly they were careful used encrypted messaging apps, but 3 months ago Ariadne forgot and sent this through the company server. She deleted it 30 seconds later. I opened the folder. The first page was a printed email dated July of this year. "Subject final timeline confirmation," I read aloud. "From Ariadne to Milton. Dr. Long confirmed he can complete the evaluation by end of month. File the petition first week of November, closed session as discussed. Transport arranged to Silver Point Memory Care, Henderson, Nevada. Staff there specialize in restricted communication protocols, no outside contact without family approval. January audit will proceed with me as acting president under emergency succession clause. By the time anyone questions the retirement discrepancies, she'll be legally incompetent to testify or defend herself." The words blurred slightly. I blinked and they sharpened. "This is a draft court petition," Margaret said, sliding another document toward me. "Emergency declaration of mental incompetence. It includes a supporting medical evaluation signed by Dr. Brent Long 4 months ago." I looked at the certificate. Official letterhead. Dr. Brent Long Board, certified geriatric psychiatrist. The diagnosis section contained paragraphs of clinical language that boiled down to one conclusion: rapidly progressing dementia, requiring immediate supervised care for patient safety and protection of assets. "He examined me 4 months ago," I said. "I've never met this man." "He was paid $12,000, Desmond said. "Wire transfer from Milton's personal account to Dr. Long's medical practice, 3 days before he signed this certificate." Margaret tapped the petition with one manicured fingernail. "The plan is elegant. They file this in closed family court, no public record, no media, just a judge reviewing what appears to be a loving daughter, seeking emergency authority to protect her declining mother. The medical certificate looks legitimate. Your CFO daughter presents evidence that you've been making confused financial decisions. She'll probably mention that security breach you triggered. Confused elderly woman trying to access systems she no longer understands." "When?" I asked. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "When do they plan to file this?" Margaret met my eyes. "Next Tuesday, 1 week from today. Closed session, family court, Judge Raymond Kellerman presiding. Once he signs the order, you lose all legal authority. No access to bank accounts, no ability to hire attorneys or speak to investigators, no capacity to defend yourself in any proceeding. They can institutionalize you immediately. The Nevada facility, Desmond added, specializes in high-net-worth dementia patients whose families want privacy. Translation, they control all communication. No phone calls without family approval. No visitors without family approval. No lawyers. I stared at the petition. The paper smelled faintly of printer ink and something else, maybe just the staleness of the office air, or maybe my own fear. 7 days, I said. Margaret nodded. They plan to file the petition next week. You have 7 days. 7 days. In 7 days, a judge would declare me incompetent based on a certificate purchased for $12,000. In 7 days, I would lose the legal right to defend myself, to access my accounts, to speak to anyone outside a locked memory care facility in Nevada. My daughter had built a trap with a timer, and I could hear it ticking. The city lights blurred through the hotel window at 2:14 in the morning, and I had already written down 7 steps. The timer was ticking. I could build a counteroffensive, or I could let grief paralyze me. There was no third option. Ernest slept fitfully on the stiff hotel mattress behind me, his breathing irregular. His engineer's mind couldn't rest any better than mine could. We'd checked into this room 4 hours ago, unable to sleep in a house that Ariadne might have under surveillance. I let myself remember for exactly 90 seconds. Ariadne's birth at Carolina Medical Center, 8 pounds, 4 ounces lungs that could shatter glass. Signing the lease for my first treatment room while holding a 6-month-old on my hip. Teaching balance sheets to a 15-year-old daughter who'd asked to understand the business because she wanted to help me. Then I stopped, closed that door, opened my laptop. The same methodical approach that had built a $28 million company from a rented room would now save it. Not emotion, systems. I created a new document and titled it Counteroffensive Protocol. Step 1, secure personal assets. Step 2, revoke critical access. Step 3, trigger federal oversight. Step 4, flip the witness. Step 5, document everything. The list grew to 22 items, each one ranked by priority level risk assessment and timeline dependency. This was how I'd survived 35 years in an industry that devoured smaller operators. You didn't win with passion. You won with process. How many steps? Ernest's voice came from the darkness behind me. 22. That's my girl. I had spent 68 years believing that being a good mother meant protecting your child from the world. It took me until this exact moment, sitting in a hotel room building a case against my own daughter, to understand that sometimes being a good mother means protecting the world from your child. Over the following week, I executed the plan while performing the failing old woman act at headquarters by day. Strike one happened on Tuesday morning. Margaret met me at First Union Bank with documents I'd signed the night before. The Revocable Living Trust transferred all personal assets, the house Ernest and I owned in Plaza Midwood, our retirement accounts, my personal investment portfolio, into a legal structure completely isolated from the corporation. Even if a judge granted Ariadne conservatorship over me, she couldn't touch these assets. The trust named Ernest as successor trustee with Margaret as backup. Ironclad, Margaret said, sliding the executed documents into her briefcase. Even if they get the conservatorship ruling, they can't touch a dollar of this. Strike 2 came Wednesday at midnight. I'd called the IT director at home, apologizing for the late hour, explaining that our insurance carrier was requiring enhanced security protocols on all financial accounts. He implemented the changes remotely while I stayed on the line. By 12:17 a.m., Ariadne's administrative access to the 3 most critical operating accounts, payroll, vendor payments, and capital reserves had been revoked. The system logged it as a routine automated security upgrade. She'd see it eventually, but it would look like standard corporate compliance, not a targeted lockout. The bank officer called Thursday to confirm. The access revocation is complete. Your daughter will see it listed as a routine security protocol update. No flags, no alerts. Strike 3 was the most dangerous. Friday morning, Margaret filed a formal ERISA whistleblower complaint with the Department of Labor's Employee Benefits Security Administration. The complaint detailed irregular withdrawals from the Employee Retirement Fund, provided transaction logs, and requested immediate investigation into potential federal violations. Once that document hit the DOL system, there was no taking it back. A federal investigation would begin whether I wanted it to or not. This pulls the pin on the grenade, Margaret had warned. Once we file this, everything accelerates. File it, I'd said. The 4th strike was the one that would either save me or destroy me. Before I reveal what that fourth strike was, I need to pause. Comment A, if you think the bribed doctor will cooperate with us, or B, if you think he'll stay loyal to Milton, and tell me why in one sentence. A quick note. The next part includes some fictionalized details added to deepen the emotional impact. The lesson is what matters. Margaret's private investigator approached Dr. Brent Long on Saturday afternoon. The investigator carried copies of Milton's $12,000 wire transfer, the fraudulent dementia certificate, and a draft immunity agreement from the U.S. Attorney's Office. The message was simple: testify truthfully about the bribe and the fabricated diagnosis, or face federal charges for healthcare fraud and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Dr. Brent Long called back Sunday evening. His voice on the phone was reedy and frightened, the sound of a man who'd taken a bribe he now desperately regretted. "I don't want to go to prison," he said. "What do you need me to do?" Margaret, on speakerphone in my hotel room, spoke with the calm precision of someone who'd negotiated 100 plea agreements. Written affidavit detailing the entire transaction, when Milton contacted you, how much he paid. Admission that you never actually examined Mrs. Townsend. Testimony that the dementia certificate is completely fabricated. I'll sign whatever you need. We'll have the documents to you by Tuesday. The call ended. Margaret looked at me across the small hotel table. The conservatorship petition just lost its medical foundation. Without Dr. Long's certificate, they have no case for incompetence. I nodded. The doctor's surrender should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing on ice that was cracking in every direction. If Ariadne detects even the smallest change in my behavior, I said, she'll know the trap is compromised. Then you know what you have to do. I did. The doctor's voice had been thin with fear when he'd agreed to everything written. Testimony documentation of the bribe admission that he'd never examined me. The conservatorship petition had just lost its medical foundation. But if Ariadne detected even the smallest change in my behavior, she'd know something was wrong. I had to play the confused, declining mother more convincingly than ever. I opened the refrigerator to put the milk away and set my car keys on the shelf next to the eggs, then walked into the living room and asked my daughter if she'd seen them anywhere. The performance had to be perfect, convincing enough to make Ariadne confident, escalating enough to make her greedy. Ariadne looked up from her phone, eyes widening with barely concealed satisfaction. "Your keys, Mother. I can't find them. I had them just a moment ago." I let my voice carry the thin edge of frustration mixed with confusion. "Did you move them?" "No, Mother. Let me help you look." She found them in the refrigerator 90 seconds later. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone and took a photograph of the keys sitting on the shelf between the milk and the eggs. Not concern, documentation. Over the following week, I executed carefully escalating performances. On Tuesday, I called Ariadne Jennifer 3 times in a single conversation. Jennifer had been my college roommate's name, dead for 15 years. Ariadne corrected me gently the first time. By the 3rd time, she just let me continue, her eyes bright with something that looked almost like joy. On Wednesday, I signed an electric bill, Joyce Palmer, my maiden name from 43 years ago. I left it on the kitchen counter where Ariadne would see it during her evening visit to check on me. She photographed it immediately, the camera shutter sound barely audible. On Thursday at headquarters, I asked about the quarterly review meeting as if I had no memory it had happened 2 weeks prior. I stood in the break room with my coffee looking genuinely confused. Didn't we schedule that for next month? Ariadne exchanged a glance with Milton, who'd appeared at her shoulder like he always did now. He pulled out his phone. "Get this," he whispered to her, not quite quietly enough. "Ask her what day it is." Ariadne's voice was sugary concern. "Mother, what day is today?" I hesitated just long enough. "Thursday. No, Tuesday, I'm sorry, sweetheart. It's been such a busy week." Milton was recording. I could see the phone angled toward me, the red dot active in his camera app. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. "Ask her where she is," he murmured to Ariadne. "Document the disorientation." But what frightened me more than their gleeful evidence gathering was Ernest's face. He played the genuinely worried husband because his worry was genuine. Each time I performed confusion, I watched his expression crack a little more. He knew it was an act. But watching me pretend to lose myself was destroying something in him anyway. Every time I pretended to forget something, a small piece of who I actually was seemed to vanish with it. Playing senile is a dangerous game. You start to wonder which parts of the performance might be real, which parts you might never get back. On Friday night, I drafted the perfect bait. The document took me an hour to compose. I titled it Transfer of Operational Control Immediate Succession Authorization. It looked official, dense with legal language I'd copied from our actual succession planning documents. The substance was simple, complete authority over all 12 rehabilitation centers, transferred to Ariadne Townsend effective immediately, with full operational, financial, and strategic decision-making power. I printed it on cream-colored bond paper that smelled faintly of the laser printer's toner, left it centered on my home office desk with my gold fountain pen beside it, signature line blank and waiting. The micro camera was already in place. Desmond's security consultant had installed it 3 days earlier inside a hollowed antique book on the shelf, a leather-bound collection of Emerson essays I'd owned since college. The lens looked like a decorative rivet in the spine. It aimed directly at the desk. Ernest and I slipped out the side door at 11:30 p.m., drove 3 blocks to the hotel we'd been using as our safe location. I opened my laptop on the cramped desk and accessed the encrypted video feed. The office appeared on screen in grainy infrared, empty, waiting. "Will they come tonight?" Ernest asked. "They know I'm getting worse. They know the document is there. I made sure Ariadne saw me working on it this afternoon. They'll come." We waited in silence. The hotel room smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and old coffee from the pot I'd made hours ago. Ernest sat beside me, his hand covering mine on the desk. At 1:15 in the morning, movement on the screen. Ariadne entered first, Milton close behind. The infrared camera turned them into pale ghosts moving through the darkness. She went straight to the desk, picked up the document, held it under the desk lamp she'd clicked on. Milton read over her shoulder. I couldn't hear them yet. The camera had no audio for the first 30 seconds while it activated the microphone, but I could see his face, relaxed tension draining from his shoulders. Then the audio kicked in, their voices crackling through my laptop speakers. "This is it." Milton's voice was thick with relief. "Once she signs this tomorrow, we can clear the remaining accounts and file the petition. The lawyer said we need operational control documented before the judge will grant emergency conservatorship. As long as Mother vanishes for a few months, everyone will believe the dementia caused the fund losses." Ariadne set the document back on the desk, positioning it exactly where I'd left it. "We're protected. Dr. Long's certificate is solid. The evidence of her decline is documented. We file Tuesday. She's in Nevada by Friday. And the company is yours." Milton pulled her against him. "Finally yours." Ariadne was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped to something quieter, wounded, almost vulnerable. "Mother never truly trusted me," she said. "She always thought I wasn't good enough." I closed the laptop. The hotel room felt suddenly airless. Ernest's hand tightened over mine. "You have the confession?" "Yes." "Perfect evidence. Their plan, the institutionalization, everything." "Yes." I had the confession on video. Perfect evidence of their plan to institutionalize me, steal the company, and blame everything on dementia. But Ariadne's quiet line, "Mother never truly trusted me," sat in my chest like a stone. She was right. I hadn't trusted her, and she'd proven exactly why. Ariadne's voice on the phone Saturday morning was bright and warm, the tone of a daughter inviting her mother to something special. "I'd love for you and Dad to come to a small family gathering tonight. Nothing formal, just a few close friends." She was right that I hadn't trusted her, but guilt was a luxury I could no longer afford. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice soft and grateful. 7 o'clock, we'll be there." "Perfect. I'm so glad, Mother. It'll mean a lot to have you there." I ended the call and immediately dialed Margaret's number. She answered on the first ring. "Tonight?" I said, my voice shedding every trace of confusion I'd been performing for weeks. "They're staging it for tonight. Public pressure in front of business partners. They'll try to make me sign the transfer document with witnesses watching. I need the case files, the camera footage, and DOL investigators positioned outside the mansion." "Desmond already has everything compiled," Margaret said. "Physical evidence, transaction logs, the video confession, Dr. Long's affidavit. We're ready. This is it. Saturday night, 7 p.m., the Eastover Mansion. I want everyone in position but out of sight. I'll signal when to enter, not before." "Understood. Joyce, are you ready for this?" I looked across the kitchen at Ernest, who'd been listening in silence. "I've been ready since the first lie." I made 2 more calls. One to Desmond, confirming the evidence chain and the federal investigators' timing. One to the head of our board of directors, requesting his presence at the mansion at 7:30 sharp, but providing no explanation. Ernest watched me move through the choreography of preparation with the methodical precision I'd used to build a company from nothing. The confused woman I'd been performing had vanished. In her place was the strategist who'd survived 35 years in an industry that crushed the unprepared. "Are you ready for this?" he asked quietly. I was ready the moment I saw the deed. I had spent the last 3 weeks pretending to forget things. Tonight I would remember everything, every stolen dollar, every forged signature, every lie my daughter told while looking me in the eyes, and I would make sure everyone in that room remembered too. The mansion was brilliantly lit when we arrived at 6:55, every window glowing gold against the November darkness. The circular driveway was already crowded with luxury vehicles, Mercedes BMWs, one Bentley, that probably belonged to Richard Caldwell from the Hospital Partnership Group. Milton greeted us at the door like we were honored guests at a state dinner. Joyce, Ernest, so wonderful you could make it. Come in, come in. The formal dining room had been transformed. The long mahogany table was set with white linens and winter floral centerpieces, white roses and silver branches that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. Crystal stemware caught the chandelier light. 20 place settings, 20 witnesses. I recognized most of the faces as Milton worked the room with a wineglass in hand, his charm dialed to maximum. Core business partners from the hospital contracts, 2 members of our board of directors, wealthy associates who'd invested in expansion projects, people whose opinions carried weight in Charlotte's medical services community. We're here tonight to celebrate something bittersweet but beautiful, Milton said, to a cluster near the fireplace, his voice carrying across the room with practiced projection. Generational transitions. Knowing when to step back gracefully and let the next generation carry the torch forward. Joyce built something remarkable, but every founder reaches a point where rest becomes necessary. Several heads nodded in sympathy. Milton caught Ernest's eye across the room. Ernest, would you mind grabbing another bottle of the Cabernet from the kitchen second shelf in the wine refrigerator? I watched my husband, 71 years old, retired after a 40-year career designing power grid systems that kept entire cities running, be treated like hired help in a house we'd paid for. Ernest's jaw tightened, but he nodded and left the room. Ariadne stood as we took our seats for dinner, tapping her wine glass with a knife until the conversation died. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, she said, her voice warm and practiced. My mother built Townsend Rehabilitation Services from a single treatment room into something that serves thousands of patients across the Carolinas. 35 years of sacrifice, of late nights, of putting everyone else's needs before her own. She paused, looking directly at me with what anyone else would read as love. But I've watched her exhaust herself, and I've realized that the greatest gift I can give her now is permission to rest, to let go, to trust that we're ready to carry the burden she's carried alone for so long. Light applause rippled around the table. Someone murmured, "Hear, hear." I sat quietly through dinner, shoulders slightly hunched, letting my fork tremble just perceptibly when I brought it to my mouth, playing exhaustion, playing defeat, playing the confused old woman who'd finally reached the end of her capacity. Midway through the main course, herb-crusted lamb that smelled like rosemary and cost more per plate than I'd spent on groceries in a week when I was building the business, Milton stood and cleared his throat. Before dessert, just one small piece of business. He pulled a black leather folder from the sideboard and walked around the table to where I sat, placed it directly in front of me, pen beside it. Just a formality to make the transition official. Transfer of operational control. Very standard succession planning. He opened the folder. The document inside was titled exactly as I'd expected, Immediate Transfer of Operational Authority, All Facilities. Every eye at the table turned toward me. The social pressure was crushing by design. 20 witnesses watching, business partners whose respect I'd spent decades earning, board members who'd voted me founder emeritus, wealthy associates who controlled hospital contracts worth millions. Sign the document and lose everything I'd built. Refuse and cause a scene proving the mental instability Ariadne had been documenting for weeks. Milton's voice dropped to something gentle, almost pitying. Everyone's watching, Joyce. Just sign it. No need to make this difficult. The folder lay flat against the white tablecloth, the signature line visible to everyone at the table. Milton stood beside me, his hand resting proprietarily on the back of my chair. Ariadne sat across from me, eyes bright with barely contained triumph. 20 witnesses watched in expectant silence. They had built this moment perfectly sign and lose everything, or refuse and prove I'm too unstable to lead. They thought they'd won. I picked up the pen. The room held its breath, 20 pairs of eyes fixed on my hand. Milton's confident smile widened. Ariadne leaned forward slightly, triumph barely concealed behind manufactured concern. I looked down at the transfer document, read the first line, the second. Then I placed the pen flat back onto the white tablecloth. I straightened my posture. Not theatrical, not dramatic, just sitting tall the way I had for 35 years running an empire built from nothing. I looked directly into Ariadne's eyes with absolute clarity. "You two played your parts beautifully," I said, my voice stripped of every tremor I'd been performing for weeks. "Both of you. I wanted to see exactly how far you'd go when you believed I'd lost the ability to fight back." The room went dead silent. Ariadne blinked rapidly, confusion breaking through the triumph like cracks spreading across ice. Milton's confident smile dissolved. "Joyce, you're confused. You're having an episode. This is for your own good." "I'm not confused, Milton." My voice was ice. "I'm methodical." I nodded once toward the entrance doors. Desmond Morales walked in carrying a thick leather briefcase. Margaret Hastings followed with a laptop under her arm. Two Department of Labor investigators in dark suits appeared in the doorway, positioning themselves to block both exits. One of the business partners, Richard Caldwell from the hospital group, half stood from his chair. "What's going on?" "Justice," I said simply. "Please stay seated. This will take approximately 15 minutes. There is a particular kind of silence that follows the moment a carefully constructed lie collapses. It's the sound of people recalculating everything they thought they knew. I could see it happening in real time across every face at that table." Desmond set the briefcase on the table and opened it with two metallic clicks. He pulled out a tablet and turned it to face the room. "Friday, November 3rd, 1:15 in the morning," he said, his voice carrying the clinical precision of someone presenting forensic evidence. "Hidden camera footage recovered from Mrs. Townsend's home office." He pressed play. The video showed Ariadne and Milton entering the darkened office in infrared. Their voices came through clearly. Milton's recorded voice. "Once she signs this tomorrow, we can clear the remaining accounts and file the petition." Ariadne's recorded voice. "As long as Mother vanishes for a few months, everyone will believe the dementia caused the fund losses. We're protected." I watched Ariadne's face drain of color. "That footage has been authenticated and time-stamped," Desmond continued. "It documents their plan to institutionalize Mrs. Townsend in a Nevada memory care facility with restricted communication protocols, no outside contact, no attorneys, no accountants. The goal was to silence her before the January audit could reveal the embezzlement." He pulled out a second folder. "Renew Advisory Group, shell company registered in Nevada under the alias Marcus Fincher. Bank records trace the account directly to Milton Prescott Finch. $756,000 stolen over 18 months through fraudulent consulting contracts." Milton's hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. "The Employee Retirement Fund," I said, my voice steady. "Tell them about the retirement fund." Desmond spread transaction logs across the white tablecloth. $3.6 million drained from the Employee Retirement Trust via 47 microtransactions over 14 months, each withdrawal structured to stay below the $15,000 automated alert threshold, each one authorized with Mrs. Townsend's cloned electronic signature. He held up a page. "Forensic analysis confirms the signature is a perfect digital forgery copied from a legitimate equipment contract Mrs. Townsend signed in July. She never authorized these withdrawals. She never saw these transactions. Her daughter, who designed the monitoring systems and held CFO authority, structured each theft to avoid detection." One of the board members, a woman I'd known for 12 years, pressed her hand to her mouth. Margaret stepped forward and opened her laptop. The conservatorship petition included a medical evaluation signed by Dr. Brent Long, diagnosing Mrs. Townsend with rapidly progressing dementia requiring immediate supervised care. She turned the laptop to face the table. Dr. Brent Long appeared on screen, pale and visibly shaking. "State your name and occupation," Margaret said. "Dr. Brent Long, board-certified geriatric psychiatrist. Did you ever examine Joyce Townsend?" "No." "Did you sign a medical certificate diagnosing her with dementia?" His voice cracked. "Yes." "Why?" "I accepted $12,000 from Milton Finch to sign a certificate diagnosing dementia for an examination I never performed. I fabricated the entire assessment based on descriptions Mr. Finch provided. I never met Mrs. Townsend. I never evaluated her cognitive function. The diagnosis is completely false." Margaret closed the laptop. The click sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I stood. My legs were steady. My voice was steady. Everything about me was exactly as sharp as it had been for 35 years. "Effective immediately, Ariadne Townsend is stripped of her CFO title and removed from all operational authority," I said. Milton Finch's personal assets are frozen under federal investigation. This mansion, purchased with funds stolen from my personal accounts, is being seized under asset forfeiture guidelines. The Department of Labor is opening criminal prosecution under multiple federal statutes: embezzlement from employee benefit plans, wire fraud conspiracy to commit elder abuse. I looked directly at my daughter. I'm not losing my mind. I showed you the difference between being actually old and weak and possessing the patience to wait. Ariadne sat completely motionless, staring at nothing. Her eyes had gone blank, empty, like someone had reached inside and switched off every light. Milton's gaze darted frantically between the DOL investigators blocking the doors. His charm had evaporated entirely, replaced by the animal panic of someone searching for an exit that didn't exist. The 20 business partners sat in stunned silence, witnesses to a complete unraveling that had taken less than 15 minutes from start to finish. Ernest stood and placed his hand on my shoulder. I covered it with mine. I had won. I had saved 200 employees' retirements and a 35-year legacy. But the daughter I'd raised was gone, replaced by this hollow shell who'd gambled everything on my weakness and lost. The daughter I'd raised was gone, but the legal machinery of justice moved forward regardless of grief. Margaret called at dawn. The federal charges were filed. I sat at my kitchen table with cold coffee I'd made an hour earlier. Ernest was still asleep upstairs, the first real sleep he'd gotten in 2 months. How many? I asked. 94 federal counts between them. Margaret's voice was clinical, careful. The wire fraud alone, 47 transactions, means 47 separate charges. Each one carries up to 20 years. Ariadne faces 18 U.S.C. Section 664 embezzlement from an employee benefit plan, along with wire fraud and forgery statutes that could add decades more. Milton has the same plus conspiracy charges and additional counts related to the offshore gambling debts and money laundering. I did the math automatically. The wire fraud alone could carry 940 years if sentenced consecutively. The government was treating this like organized crime. And bail. My voice sounded oddly calm, like I was asking about the weather. Judge called them sophisticated flight risks. The offshore account structure, the Nevada institutionalization plan, the shell companies. The prosecutor argued they'd built an entire infrastructure for disappearing. They're in federal custody until trial. Dr. Long. Suspended sentence in exchange for full cooperation as a state witness. He'll testify to everything. The mansion. Locked pending asset forfeiture proceedings. It'll be liquidated to help compensate the retirement fund. We're working with the DOL to expedite recovery. Milton's parents, I asked, named as co-conspirators in the civil forfeiture action. No criminal charges yet. The U.S. attorney is still deciding whether they knew the LLC was fraudulent from the start. Their assets tied to the mansion are frozen regardless. I thanked her and ended the call. Sat in the quiet kitchen watching November sunlight creep across the floor. Justice was moving, swift, methodical, exactly as it should. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the exhaustion after a war nobody should have had to fight. On Wednesday morning, I stood in front of 200 employees in the main rehabilitation center's auditorium. They packed every seat, standing room only along the walls. Physical therapists in scrubs who'd left patients mid-session. Administrative staff who'd closed their offices. Facility managers who'd driven from our satellite locations across the Carolinas. The air was thick with dread. They knew something catastrophic had happened. The rumors had been spreading for days. I refused the podium, stood on the floor level instead, eye to eye with everyone. "My daughter stole from you," I said. My voice carried across the silent room without amplification. $3.6 million over 14 months from the Employee Retirement Fund. I'm telling you her name because you deserve the truth, not a sanitized press release. Ariadne Townsend, my daughter, your CFO. She structured the theft to avoid detection, used my forged signature to authorize every transaction, and planned to institutionalize me before the January audit could reveal what she'd done. The silence was absolute. Someone in the back row started crying quietly. She's in federal custody now. So is her husband, Milton Finch, who helped execute the fraud. They'll face trial on 94 federal counts. I paused. Let them absorb the betrayal. Is this what justice feels like? Or just the exhaustion after a war? Nobody should have had to fight. But here's what matters most, I continued. Every retirement account will be restored to full balance. The recovered assets, the seized mansion, the frozen accounts, the shell company funds are sufficient. The Department of Labor has also activated ERISA protection guarantees during the prosecution. Not $1 of your futures was actually lost. Not one retirement delayed. Not one plan derailed. The room exhaled collectively, a sound like wind through trees. Marcia Blanchard stood up. 48 years old, veteran physical therapist, 20 years with the company. She'd been there when we opened the second location. She'd helped train half the staff in this room. She began to clap, slow, deliberate. The sound echoed into the auditorium. Then someone else stood. Then another. The applause built like thunder. Marcia's voice cut through. You could have buried this. You didn't have to tell us it was your own child. My composure finally cracked. Tears I'd been holding for 2 months broke through. I nodded, unable to speak. Ernest stood beside me, his hand finding mine. The applause continued for what felt like hours. Late November, the boardroom felt smaller than I remembered. 7 new board members sat around the mahogany table, community leaders, healthcare executives, legal experts, financial officers, none of them named Townsend. Margaret sat to my left, legal documents spread before her. Ernest sat to my right, quiet as he'd been through all of this. The new bylaws prohibit any Townsend family member from holding board or executive positions. I said, reading from the document I'd drafted myself. This is a permanent prohibition. It survives my death. Ernest's death, any change in leadership or ownership structure. This company will never again be controlled by someone who inherited proximity to me rather than earning trust through demonstrated integrity. One of the new board members, a hospital CFO I'd worked with for 15 years, spoke carefully. You're including yourself in that prohibition. Eventually, yes. I'm retaining the title of founder emeritus. But operational authority, strategic decisions, financial oversight that transfers to this board immediately. I'm not retiring. I'm ensuring this place belongs to the people who built it, not the people who happen to be born into it. Ernest's hand found mine under the table. We'd built this together. Now we were giving it away together. In addition, I continued, 10% of annual net profits will be permanently directed to an employee senior hardship fund. Medical emergencies, family crises, the situations that destroy people who've spent their lives taking care of others. The vote was unanimous. I walked out of that boardroom an hour later, my title intact, but my power transferred. The employees had their future back. The company had governance that would outlast my lifetime. Ariadne and Milton would spend years, maybe decades, in federal prison. But as the door closed behind me for the last time, as someone who held real power there, I realized I hadn't planned what came after victory. I'd spent 2 months orchestrating a takedown, building evidence, executing a counteroffensive with military precision. I'd never once imagined what I would do with the rest of my life. I hadn't planned what came after. So I went back to the beginning. The old brick building in Noda looked smaller than I remembered. Ernest and I stood together on the sidewalk in the pale golden light of a late November afternoon, watching shadows stretch long and thin across pavement that had been repaved at least twice since I'd last set foot here. The building's exterior had passed through different hands, worn different signs, served different purposes. What had once been an entrance to affordable commercial space, a sanctuary for dreamers and desperate entrepreneurs, now opened into ground-floor retail artisan coffee boutique clothing. A gallery selling overpriced abstract paintings to people who had never needed to borrow rent money from anyone. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I simply stood on the sidewalk and let the remembering come. 3rd floor corner unit, I said quietly, 4,200 square feet that felt like a palace after working out of our garage for 2 years. Ernest studied the building with his engineer's eye the way he always did, probably calculating load-bearing walls and updated electrical codes in the back of his mind. You were 33, he said. I was 36. We had $1,200 in savings and a dream that sounded completely insane to everyone except the 2 of us. I borrowed 3 months' rent from my sister, signed the lease on a Friday, found a used vinyl treatment table at an auction on Saturday morning. Opened for business Monday with one patient, Mrs. Coleman, 74 years old, recovering from hip replacement surgery. She paid $18 in cash and thanked me like I had given her something precious. You cried when she left, Ernest said. I did. The memory was so vivid I could still feel the texture of that vinyl table beneath my palms, still smell the faint mustiness of the carpet I had vacuumed 3 times, trying to make it look presentable. The worn linoleum floor, the single window that never quite closed all the way, letting in cold drafts and traffic noise, and the warm smell of coffee drifting up from the diner next door. I can still smell the coffee from that diner, I said. The building is condos now, $800,000 for 600 square feet. The coffee shop closed in 2008, Ernest said. The financial crisis. I looked it up before we came. I turned to look at him. You looked it up. I knew you'd mention it. He gave a small, quiet smile. 43 years. I know which memories matter to you. I had come here thinking I was searching for something. Purpose, maybe. Direction. Some answer to the question of what a 68-year-old woman does when the mission that consumed every waking hour for 2 months is suddenly completely finished. When the crisis is resolved and the lawyers have gone home and the silence rushes in to fill the space where urgency used to live. But standing here on this sidewalk, I realized I wasn't searching at all. I was confirming what I already knew. The answer had never been in what I built. It was in what I chose to protect. How do you measure a life? In square footage expanded year by year, in revenue generated across a growing enterprise, in the number of treatment tables that multiplied from 1 to 347 across 12 facilities spread through 4 states? Or do you measure it differently in the principles you refused to compromise when compromise would have been so much easier? In the moment you chose 200 employees' futures over your own daughter's freedom. In the decision to burn your own legacy to ash, rather than allow it to stand on a foundation built from stolen trust. I didn't have the answer. Standing there in the amber light, I wasn't sure I ever would. Some questions don't resolve themselves into clean conclusions. Some questions are simply the shape of a life lived honestly, without the comfort of certainty. We stood in silence for a long moment. The November air carried the smell of car exhaust and distant wood smoke from someone's fireplace a few blocks over. The city had grown up around this neighborhood, swallowed the scrappy industrial corridors where young entrepreneurs used to rent cheap space and work impossible hours and believe impossible things. It had been transformed into something expensive and curated and beautiful in a way that left no room for the beautiful mess of beginning. Progress, probably. I understood it. But I still missed the coffee shop. Ernest's voice dropped until it was barely above a whisper. Do you regret having ever trusted her? It was the question I had been avoiding for weeks, the one that woke me at 3 a.m. in the dark stillness of a house that felt too quiet. The one that sat heavy in my chest during every quiet moment when there was nothing left to plan or execute or defend, when the machinery of crisis had stopped and there was nothing left to do but sit with the grief of what had happened. I didn't answer immediately, not because I was uncertain, but because some answers require weight, require space, require the gravity of honest words delivered without the urge to soften them into something easier to hold. No, I said finally. Trusting your child is the duty of a mother. You trust them because that is what love demands of you. You believe in their capacity for goodness because refusing to believe would break something essential, something foundational in both of you. You give them that faith not because they've earned it perfectly, but because withholding it would be its own kind of damage. I paused, watching the sunset deepen against the old brick until the buildings glowed the color of warm honey. But stopping your child from destroying the lives of others, that is also the duty of a mother. Perhaps the harder one. Perhaps the one that costs everything you imagined your life would look like. But a duty still, a responsibility that doesn't disappear simply because honoring it tears you apart. The daughter I had raised was gone. She sat in federal custody awaiting trial, but she had been gone long before the arrests, long before the lawyers and the depositions and the terrible clarity of what she had done. She had gone the first time she looked at those retirement accounts and saw opportunity instead of sacred trust. She had gone the moment she chose to forge my signature on documents rather than build her inheritance through integrity and patience and honest work. But the people who had built this company alongside me were still here. Marcia Blanchard, and nearly 200 others whose retirements were now secure, whose faith I had protected, even when protecting it, meant dismantling everything I had spent 35 years constructing. Their futures were intact. Their trust had not been betrayed. That had to mean something. I believed it meant everything. Ernest said nothing more. He simply extended his hand open and steady at his side. I placed mine inside it. His skin was warm against the cold November air, his grip sure and unhurried. The same hand that had held mine the night we signed that first lease with shaking fingers and enormous hope. The same hand that had gripped my shoulder in the delivery room when Ariadne was born. The same hand that had covered mine beneath the boardroom table on the day we signed away everything we had spent a lifetime building because it was the right thing to do. We began to walk. Not back toward the old building, but forward down the sidewalk, past the boutiques and galleries and expensive coffee shops and converted condos. Into whatever came next, without a map, without a plan. 35 years ago, it had started with a rented room, a secondhand treatment table, and a stubborn belief that I could build something worth leaving behind. I still believe that. I had built a company that serves thousands of patients, that employs hundreds of people, that will outlast me by decades, and continue its work long after I am gone. But I understood now that the most important thing I was leaving behind was not the company itself. It was the record of what I had been willing to do and what I had refused to do when it mattered most. It was the knowledge written into the lives of real people that someone had stood between them and harm and had not moved. Ernest and I kept walking. The sunset spread across the November sky in long, slow waves of amber, and rose painting the old brick neighborhood gold one final time before the dark came. Somewhere behind us was everything I had built, everything I had fought for across 4 decades of stubborn, costly, necessary love. Ahead was just the road, and that felt like enough. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Looking back, I see where I went wrong. I trusted blindly because she was my daughter. I ignored the small signs, the defensive reactions when I asked questions, the way she controlled every financial conversation. Don't make my mistake. Love your children, yes, but verify their character through their actions, not your hopes. Trust must be earned even from family, especially from family. The hardest lesson I learned through this family drama is that protecting people who depend on you sometimes means stopping the people you love most. 200 employees trusted me with their futures. My daughter gambled with their retirements. When I discovered the truth, I had a choice: protect my daughter or protect the truth. I believe God put me through this to show me that real love isn't covering up someone's crimes, it's holding them accountable before they destroy more lives. Real legacy isn't what you build, it's what you refuse to let fall. If my story resonated with you, leave a comment below. Have you faced family drama where you chose between loyalty and truth? These revenge stories with Mom at the center aren't just about vindication. They're about protecting what matters. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Silent Revenge with Auntie May for more stories like this. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time and attention mean more than you know. One final note: while this story contains fictionalized elements for narrative and reflection, the lessons about family trust and accountability are real. May they serve you well.